NCORE offers 2 webinars per month on the first and last Wednesday. Our Emerging Scholars webinars are held on the first Wednesday, and they focus on ideas that speak directly to the experiences of students. These webinars are either facilitated or co-facilitated by a student and are intended to identify emerging scholars. These are always available at no cost. Our next student webinar will be presented on December 2nd, when they see us, experiences of Black males navigating historically white institutions. Please visit our website, www.ncore.ou.edu, for the full list of featured webinars for this season. Would like to encourage you to use the chat box to tell us where you're joining us from. Also tweet, Instagram, or share with the hashtag NCORE, start the conversation online. It is incredibly important for us to stay connected, especially during these times that are very uncertain. Today, I have the pleasure of having Dr. Meta Castafen. She is a professor in the Gaylord College of Journalism and Mass Communication here at the University of Oklahoma in Norman. She holds the Gaylord Family Professorship in Strategic Communications. Her topic, as we have already mentioned, is on teaching diversity, equity, and inclusion in media and communication studies. We are so very grateful for her expertise. We encourage you to post questions in the Q&A box, and she will address them at the end of the presentation. I also want to let you know that we do have closed caption, and we have ASL provided to you. This video will also be available for viewing in 5 to 10 days on our website. Please help me welcome my friend and our professor, Dr. Meta Castafen.
Thank you so very much. I'm going to begin setting up my slides for sharing, and then let's jump into this conversation. I am, first of all, just so thrilled to be here with you. Thank you very much, Dr. Rungo, for such a generous and warm introduction. I also want to thank PhD student Asia Mutes, who is a graduate fellow with the Women's Philanthropy Network, who first suggested that I present this webinar. I'm grateful to be hosted by the University of Oklahoma's NCORE Conference Series program, which in the view of many is unparalleled in its rich history and impact over the more than 20 years of its existence. Let me also say thank you to all of you who have signed up to participate in this webinar about diversity and media education. I want to say from the onset that while the genesis of my style of teaching diversity and inclusion topics arose from my professional responsibilities as an educator in journalism, I see this session as tackling so much more. As land acknowledgement, before I begin the webinar formally, I want to acknowledge that this land on which we inhabit here at the University of Oklahoma is physically situated in the ancestral home of the Caddo Nation and the Wichita and affiliated tribes. I acknowledge this territory once also served as a hunting ground, trade exchange point, and a migration route for the Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, and Osage nations. Today, 39 tribal nations dwell in the state of Oklahoma as a result of settler and colonial policies that were designed to assimilate Native people. We acknowledge and honor and respect the diverse indigenous peoples connected to this land. We fully recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereign rights of all of Oklahoma's 39 tribal nations. So here are my goals. I want to talk about the goals for this session, and I really have three specific outcomes that I want everyone to be able to get out of this session. And I'm going to give a little background about my own teaching experience. Then I want to frame these contexts with an instructional model, including some snapshots of theoretical and pedagogical frameworks that have guided my approach, as well as an overview of the course structure. By this time, we'll be ready to examine some specific selected assignments. And while I can't cover everything that I do over the course of this 15-week class, I do want to give you snapshots that give you a sense of what the students do and the three levels of learning that I build into this course. That includes personal reflection, building small community through conversation, and tackling a larger community conversation about difficult issues with comfort and confidence. That's what I want the students to lead with. I'm going to spend a little time on feedback and assessments because I think it's important to talk about how instructors can mitigate perceptions that their evaluations are not somehow politically charged or unfairly biased, particularly when we're teaching a topic such as this. Finally, I'll end my prepared talk with some examples of student responses and their own self-evaluations about their learning achievements. So if we could go full screen to the slides without me on it. Yeah, okay. Let's talk about goals. This is what I hope we all get from this session. Number one, I really want us to understand why media in all of its various forms are so influential about the issues that we care about: race, ethnicity, identity, and equity in all of its representations. Secondly, I want us to be able to recognize and appreciate media literacy as an approach to these issues, irrespective of our disciplines, particularly at this moment in time. Finally, and this is the most exciting part, I think, I want us to share with each other some specific class examples and class activities that anyone could easily translate into your own teaching and instruction if you so desire. Now, a little background. Yes, I'm going back to the very beginnings for me, and I would love to be able to say that everything I'm going to share with you came to me in a dream or some brilliant insight overnight or other dramatic intervention. The truth is, I backed into this curriculum by happy accident. My newly minted dissertation was about race and media, and then I landed a full-time position at a 2-year college in Dallas. I was so excited, and I asked for an opportunity in this communication department to teach a class about media and diversity. When I got the chance, I looked and I had a class of 8 students. I was thrilled. We spent the semester going through readings, taking quizzes, and having honest discussions. And as we got to the end of that term, I gave the students a choice. Would they like to have a traditional final exam to show what they know, or would they prefer to do a hands-on project? These 8 students chose to do a project, and we went with it. And boy, was I pleasantly surprised. One student, for instance, invited a panel of media guests to our class to talk to us in person about how they navigated diversity on the job. Another student who was interested in a film career took his camera and did interviews about homelessness through the lens of race, gender, and class. Now, fast forward more than 2 decades later, and I have since recreated variations of this class for 2 universities, advised colleagues across the country who are teaching similar classes, and co-authored a textbook about this class. Today, I call the course Race, Gender, Class in the Media. But now, I'd like us to take a quick friendly poll about media. So here is the question. How many hours a day do you use media of any kind? And we have our options from minimal 1 to 2 hours to maximum 10 hours or more. But what I'd like to do is just get a sense from everyone of what their own media usage is. Great, great. So I'm seeing some answers in the chat. 4 to 6 hours, 6 to 9, 6 to 9. I got a lot of 6 to 9 hours. Oh, and somebody is going for 10 or more hours. Okay, awesome. Great. And some of us are in the minimal 1 to 2 hours. Okay, very good. Love it, love it, love it. Now, why don't we compare our responses with a recent national survey and see how we line up? Has everyone had a chance to vote? Okay. Has everyone voted? Great, wonderful. So, let's go now to national study. Considering all kinds of media, that means the digital, when we're on the phone or social media, as well as what we consider to be traditional media, television, radio, those kind of things. This is what the national average is for all of us. Digital media, we tend to spend close to 8 hours on digital media. Traditional media, a little more than 6 hours. 8 and 6, that's 14 hours involved in media daily. Now, some of this may be overlapping because you might be like me watching TV and texting. So, that time kind of folds in. Nevertheless, that's pretty astounding, right? So what I really want us to do is to think about this in terms of the students that we're teaching, to look at the generations. So first of all, let's look at how generations are defined. We probably have seen this information or familiar with the concept that it really is devised by marketing companies, this partitioning of populations, because they spend a good deal of time thinking about shared characteristics and values that drive purchasing decisions according to birth dates. So you may already be familiar with most of these, but let's just take a look. Of course, baby boomers on up to Gen Z, right? The Gen Z group is interesting. These are the students who are increasingly becoming part of our classrooms. They are also referred to as digital natives. These are the people who are growing up with habits such as streaming, movies, cell phones, and portable media as the norm, not the exception. Now, we're familiar with millennials. Let's take a look at how many hours they spend online, right? 20, that's a lot. About 50% really spend a considerable amount of time online. And it's not diminishing the younger our students get. Let's take a look at current research about teens and tweens, which gets closer to our Gen Z group. They spend so much time. On any given day, American teenagers, which is like between 13 and 18, average about 9 hours of entertainment media use. And this doesn't include time spent at school or homework. Tweens, which is that group between 8 and 12, use an average of about 6 hours daily entertainment. For both groups, their most popular media activities include watching TV, videos, and listening to music. Think about the implications for this. We are teaching students who may find a YouTube influencer more credible as a source of information than a professor. The influence of this generation is also pushing against the types of media that are available to us. We are, for instance, seeing an increasing interest in newer media forms such as VR, virtual reality, and augmented reality. Just a quick definition here. Virtual reality is an immersive digital experience that a computer generates and has the qualities of real time, right? So you can pretend you're experiencing something completely different, separate from your lived reality. Augmented reality adds digital information to your experience in the real world. So, as opposed to creating an alternative experience, it gives you data. And most often, you can access it through a cell phone. So, in this example, you're getting details about the Arc of Triumph in real time while you're looking at it. All right. So, the interesting thing also, as we consider these mediated environments, is how respondents now are interacting in terms of expressing opinions about different issues. And this study, the results were released just earlier this month, but based on this marketing company's study, they found that people are saying as many as 74% that every person's view has the right to be respected. At the same time, they are asserting, 55% of them, that people have an obligation to speak frankly on issues. What's interesting to me about this statistic is that we have such a high degree of people who are ostensibly saying everyone should express their view or everyone has a right to express their view. We have a smaller percentage of people saying you have an obligation, but what about that 20% in the middle? Are they still trying to figure out how to express their views? This might be a space where our students fall. I also want to just quickly share some data about younger generations and their views about diversity, which also makes these kind of conversations urgent. Younger generations, see our Gen Z, our millennials, see an increased diversity as good for society. So our students are at least intellectually thinking diversity is a good thing. So we are all sharing this space where media impacts us all. Consider this. Not only are our students using media at a rate we've never seen before, faculty are being asked to include this in the way we teach. I mean, and so if you're noticing in your environment, I'm sure you're probably getting encouragement or being offered training sessions on how to include video and other kinds of new technology methods in your teaching. This is why we're trying to respond to the new way that our emerging students are processing information. On a personal and individual note, we are all consuming media and we're creating media. Our Facebook posts, Instagram posts, Twitter, and the videos you make of your cats and dogs. I mean, all of this plays into the way that media consumption has changed. So let's talk about why we teach these courses. Okay. So here's another quick poll, and let's use chat also for this. My question, what should the focus of a diversity class be? So for those of us who are already in this game, why do we teach? What are we trying to achieve? So let's share some of those ideas. Why are we in this game? I don't think it's for fame. Let's see what some of our answers are. We want more informed students. We want to expose students to new ideas. Harm prevention, that's interesting. Social justice, love it. Passionate about diversity topics and issues. Yes, that's certainly how I got into it, right? My own passion. Critical thinking, cultural competence. We want to change the world. I love that. I love that. I want to show the interconnectedness of all people. We also want students to become leaders so that they can help create a more just and equitable world. Love it, love it, love it. All of these are really noble goals. And of course, there's no wrong answer. But I want to share and be completely transparent with you about what I've come to believe are the three most important goals for my students in my class. Leadership skills, love that. Power. We could go on and on. We all have great reasons for doing this work. But I'd like you to consider these. My instructional goals are pretty specific in the course of this course. I want students to learn the terminology of diversity. It matters to know what a microaggression is or to understand different theories and ideas. I also want students to learn the history and the context of what I call the isms: racism, sexism, classism, ableism, and so on. So if they're going to critique it, they will understand its origins. Finally, I want students to learn how to listen and discuss issues across differences, empowered by facts, theory, and critical thinking. I look at it this way. I only have their attention for one semester. And I learned long ago, I cannot change their thinking to match mine. I can't create an activist where students may not be so inclined, but I'm convinced that we can challenge students and ourselves to think differently and to prepare them for what may be lifelong conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this can happen at the nexus of diversity, equity, inclusion, and the media. What we think and communicate about different people will influence others every time we use email, text, or other forms of social media. Well, let's look at a snapshot of the overall course structure. Starting with the basic tools, and that's our learning management system. Here at OU, we use Canvas, but I'm sure if you use something different, you do the same thing. But I use the LMS site to put all of the structural information about the class, all of my assignments, and additional media assets. Another tool, textbook. After years of teaching this course, I teamed up with a fabulous colleague, Dr. Sharon Bramlett Solomon, who's at Arizona State University, and we co-authored a textbook, Race, Gender, Class, and the Media, published by Kendall Hunt. It follows a media literacy perspective and includes history, theory, and definition of terms specific to understanding diversity. Now, besides the text, I really keep the involvement for the students at a very low bar. All they need is access to a computer and a cell phone. There's no special equipment beyond that or software they need to learn to do all of the exercises. Finally, I have 2 class rules. One, besides all the policies that we have to share, but class rules, listen. It means they have to be active listeners. And 2, stay in the conversation. This means I encourage them from bailing out on difficult topics. They get to, and in most cases they're required to, add their input to a class exchange, regardless if they're taking an uncommon stance or if they're a bit shy. Let me go over some context now for the course. My conceptual frameworks are based on 3 pots of knowledge. 1, media literacy, Bloom's taxonomy, and Bandura's social learning theory. First, media literacy. And the idea of that is to expose the students to the different roles of media. That includes information, entertainment, conduit of social mores, and as economic enterprises, businesses. Students confront the differences between verified stories versus opinion writing and explore such terms as gaslighting, fake news, and filter bubbles. Next, I use Bloom's taxonomy. We're usually all familiar with this, to pace the course, to give it its overall structure. Yes, there are things that I want them to learn, but I also want them to move to this highest level where they feel comfortable about practicing those listening and conversational skills in real time that I say I value. Finally, my 3rd conceptual framework is Bandura's social learning theory. In essence, the theory says that by watching others and doing some rehearsal and role playing, we can learn new behaviors. So in this class, I challenge them to not only critique what's problematic in the media portrayals we're looking at, but to look for good examples, as well as to be creative and be the media they want to see. Now, all 3 of these models I think are valuable. They each contribute something really, really important to the student's learning experience. But imagine putting them all together and building some synergies. What if students learn about the media they consume while they are producing their own? What if they learn a concept and then perform it? What if they find examples they want to emulate and then imitate them? So that's what I mean by putting it all together. Because by doing so, we're harnessing some synergies that I argue really enhance and strengthen our overall learning goals. Now let's take a look at some selected assignments. As I mentioned earlier on, I try to think of the assignments and organize them into small community conversations, individual reflection and critique, and level 3 big C community dialogues. I'm going to talk about the level 1 small community conversations. And I lean very, very heavily on the discussion assignments within the course. In fact, each time I offer the course, there are 15 discussions over the course of the semester, which means the students are responding to some prompt pretty much on a weekly basis. These conversations, though, as discussions, really allow the students to build community very quickly and at the very beginning. I begin, of course, with a benign example, easy question. So one of the questions are, who are you? And so students get to describe their preferred names and their hopes and aspirations. And here are the prompts that I give them. What's your preferred name, your major, dream job? And I always ask them to add a graphic or a picture to whatever discussion assignment they're doing. So here's some examples. The student is Claire, this is her major, this is how she got to OU, here's her dream job. She has 2 best friends that are going to OU, great. Here's another student named Fletcher, this is his major, and now he tells us something about where he's from and what's special about that community. His dream job, working for Coca-Cola. And then he is explaining the graphic or the picture that he picked, which was a picture of his hometown. So this is benign. We also have some fun. Another activity I use in discussion is one I call Game On. And so there's a chapter in the book that talks about virtual gaming, and there are a lot of, if you're a serious gamer, you may be aware that there are a lot of issues about identity and gender and so forth in the gaming world. This allows the students to kind of reflect on that in a different way. They don't have to be a hardcore gamer, though. They can use cards or whatever works for them. But again, I direct them with some open-ended questions, things that will prompt them to think more deeply about their games and also to do some research. So it's not just their opinion. I want to see what else they're finding out about it. I ask them to verify their gaming activities and with a picture. So here's one student, this was his game of choice. Another student, this was her game of choice. And, you know, we can learn and have some fun. But there are some challenging questions. So this is the level 2, the individual reflection and critique. I'm going to come back to discussions too, which again is that kind of first level building community to show how in a crisis students use that to support each other. But the second level, individual reflections and critique, are assignments that require more writing, and they are not shared in the discussion component of Canvas. It's an assignment, which means they're sharing it with me and I'm sharing my feedback with them. It doesn't mean that they don't talk about it. They can when we have our other public sharing opportunities. But a basic assignment for doing this is what I call the press pass. Now, this assignment is modeled after a journalism protocol where reporters are asked, especially in high-profile interviews and events, to provide proof of who they are. Press passes are a form of identification that usually includes a picture and some key information. So I have two press pass assignments. The first one, which I call True Identity, I ask them to describe who they are using personal qualities to define themselves that are positive, and they can use racial or ethnic or gender classifications. The second one is stereotyped identity. It is designed to be a distortion of who they think they are. Here's the stereotype, an example. It's from a Black male. He says, people look at me, and he looks nothing like Ice Cube, but he said, this is how people see me. Quick temper, no college degree. The name I use is boy. I've heard these phrases. They generalize me and I don't like it. So it gives an outlet for that. I must say that the stereotype assignment, though, is very difficult for my Anglo students. And often I have to press them. They struggle with this because it asks them to confront, maybe for the first time, that they may be judged negatively just on sight. They have to assume that no one is giving them the benefit of the doubt. And finally, by creating this ID tag, I'm asking them to imagine that society at large will define them by this image. So here's an example of what an Anglo student thought. She created a name, and here are the three negative qualifications. And yes, she's a member of a sorority, but with these assignments, as you've noticed, I asked them to reflect. So they do this, and this is where she talks about how she feels about it. It's a negative stereotype. You know, I'm really smart. I'm driven. I'm not stupid. And so it hurts that people will assume that about me sight unseen. Now, this activity really builds on the theoretical conversation we're having about stereotypes, and even how stereotypes are applied to the other, and we bring it home. What if you were a stereotype and everybody gets to participate and feel a little bit of that discomfort? Finally, I want to review the level 3, or the big community dialogues. Remember, the discussions are in-house, but we bond as a class. And before you know it, students are sharing and commenting, which I required them to do on each other's posts, and learning and growing. The big C dialogues means opportunities to take the things that we are talking about outside of the classroom. And that's a scarier place. So there are two examples of those assignments. One is interview with a stranger, and the other is a Twitter conversation. So here's an example of some of the student work on the interview with a stranger. Now, the interview with a stranger is really an adaptation of a diversity interview that journalism professionals and even some professors have used to teach students about the importance of having diverse sources for their news articles. Typically, they do this assignment by sending their trainees or students to drop in on a place in a community that's likely new to them and that will have a different experience, such as a Black church or a Muslim mosque or a restaurant known for its exotic cuisine. But I resist that type of assignment for numerous reasons in exactly that way. And because it promotes the perspective that diversity could be staged as a parachute in, parachute out experience. Instead, I want to challenge my students to see the potential of having diversity conversations as part of everyday relationships. So, the instructions for the diversity interview with a stranger is an assignment where students get to choose their interview subjects as long as they are not students in the class. Their subjects also have to represent discernible differences from themselves. They have to be gendered differently and visibly racially different. So students, once they get over their nervousness, find unlikely conversations in unexpected places. So as part of the material that they turn in, I ask for a time code transcript that just samples some of the conversation. In this one, this is a student who chose his girlfriend, not exactly a stranger, but it's still qualified. And he said she's Latina, and he learned some things about how she appears white, but she relates very strongly with Latino culture. She doesn't like to bring up that she's Latino, though, because of the climate in the US. Now, they were dating, but these were issues and things they had not talked about. And so he goes on to say that this was really useful conversation and gave him things that he hadn't thought about. Also, in the diversity conversations, remember it goes both ways. So here's an African American student who, in his reflection on his diversity or her diversity interview, she talked about asking him about whiteness. And then the friend talks about that moment in college where he said, wow, I'm white, and felt like the other. Her response, wow, as a person of color, I experienced this more times than I can count. It was interesting for me to hear about this experience from someone who is nearly always in the majority. Can't get that in a textbook, but it is powerful when they have the one-on-one conversation. And here's another reflection from an Anglo student. I learned a lot about my own judgments towards African Americans during this interview. She was surprised, and this often happens, about the reality of racism in their friends' lives that their friends often hide, a recognition of the pain, and her own reaction. Her takeaway that she can be more intentional to help respond to these kinds of incidents now that she has a better awareness of what their potential impact is. So my last public-facing big community conversation is in the Twitterverse. And yes, they are required to tweet for credit. And I talk about what it's like to have a conversation in a public space and how you have to be respectful. And after that, it's up to them. They can talk about what we talked about in class. They can respond to national events. It's up to them. So here's an example: responding to class, providing an article, doing some documentation. And this was following an in-class discussion we had about blackface. Here's another comment recently. We talked about missing and exploited Indigenous women. And so here's the student's reaction about learning about that. I'm going to end by showing, as I promised, to talk a little bit about assessments. Remember at the beginning, I said, I don't want to judge anyone's opinion, but I do look at how they answer it. And all of us who have done grading, we know we can tell when students are just trying to skate by or when they're really investing something in it. So as you noted probably from those earlier examples, I have questions to guide their responses. So do they answer all of the questions? Do they document their sources? Can they show me evidence of critical thinking? Here's something about writing quality. And then also, are they using an embedded graphic? So it basically is assessing the students' work on content, what they're saying, and execution, how they're saying. And I use this rubric, and it allows me to really distinguish the students who are giving their all and students who don't. And I can reward good work. And students who opt out or skip assignments or discussions are not able to ride on the coattails of group discussions. They stand or fall on their own efforts. So I talked about also as the assessment, the students are required to respond to other students' work. At our campus, certainly like many others, we have had this class during times where our campus has been rocked by tensions and challenges. During those times, I've been able to dedicate a discussion post to the contemporary issues. And when emotions are running high, I'm able to help the students anchor their remarks with an invitation to define, to research, and to think critically about the issue at hand. So this was a response about the use of a racial slur on our campus. The impact on the students were profound. My students included student journalists who were actually covering what was going on for the newspaper. So they were living it and they were covering it. And this gave them an opportunity to really debate and talk about what that was like. And here's an African American student just expressing weariness. This has happened every semester I've been here. I'm tired. Others in the community were able to really see that this was a real thing and offer supportive comments. Then it gave students an opportunity to express solidarity. It says, you know, we have to stand together, we have to condemn what's happened. And what I see is that they're finding their voice, not because someone is telling them it's the right thing to do, but because they get it. Finally, here's our final exam. I asked them to reflect on what they've learned. And they can talk about the class, their uncertainty. I didn't know what to expect, but I ended up learning. And as always, they include some sort of picture. Here's a student. The world is my oyster, and I really now feel empowered to give back to it. And finally, here's another student who got to learn about whiteness and to challenge her own privilege and to think about how she could use that. So I thank you so very much for your attention. I do hope you feel free to contact me to carry on this conversation or to follow me on Twitter. And now, let's have some questions. But thank you so much for your time so far.
Thank you so much. If you can stop sharing your screen, we do
Yes.
have several questions here, Dr. Mehta.
Okay.
One of the questions was actually, do you offer this online or is this in person only?
Very good question. So I have offered this class both in person and online. I'm currently offering it exclusively online.
Okay. And Amanda wants to know, how do you work with minority students who feel threatened by other classmates' ideas?
Well, I um I'm trying to think of a way to do. Let me talk about in person. So when I have taught this in person, and I'm teaching at a PWI, predominantly white university. So when I have students of color, they're always very few and far between. In person, I would never call on a student of color to comment on the particular issue at the time. But the way I facilitated their voice was to divide the entire class into small discussion groups. So it'd be 4 or 5 students out of a 60 student room. They'd get together and then they would have to talk about that issue. After they spent time discussing that, then I would ask the group, you appoint one person who will stand up now and share to the rest of the class what your group talked about. Now, with that kind of structure, it keeps the student of color from being put on the spot. If they want to step up and be the leader of their group, they can. If they don't, they can still ensure that their viewpoint will be represented to the rest of the class. Online, it hasn't been a problem. And I think the key is getting those discussions started early and consistently so they begin to bond and they look out for each other, and no one has attacked anybody else in the discussion in any of these sessions that I've done.
Mm-hmm. So I want to let all the participants know that the slides will be available. You can email ncorewebinars@ou.edu, ncorewebinars@ou.edu. This broadcast will also be available in 5 to 10 days. I want to let everybody know that here in Oklahoma, we have had a nice storm. We were just crossing our fingers that today we'll be able to come live. So we have hundreds of thousands of people without power. So our campus is actually closed today. It was closed yesterday. So it may take a little longer for our IT people to do this editing, but yeah, they are available. The presentation will be available. There's another question here from Amanda. Do you do the stereotype conversation as something only turned into you, or do they share all of their ideas with their peers?
That's a good question. I have actually done it both ways. I've done it as a discussion where they can see everybody else's response and then comment on it. And I've done it as an assignment where they turn it into me and I get to comment on it. Now, I prefer the assignment because it forces each student to answer this without the benefit of seeing what someone else says. So what I found in the discussion was the first time a student would say cheerleader stereotype or something like that, then a lot of the other female Anglo students would pick up on that and do that. And I wanted to come authentically from their own experience. And I can push back in the assignment portion of the class in a way that doesn't demean them and makes them feel safe about exposing this. But I can tell you, it's a very difficult place for Anglo students to go to. Very, very difficult. So I respect that. Now, the last thing I want to say about that, though, is that they do have the opportunity to share with others, and they do in the public comment spaces. So on Twitter, they can voluntarily say, wow, that stereotype assignment really made me think, or, you know, something else. So they can bring it up in another discussion chat session.
There's so many questions coming in, but we'll try to respond to as many as we can. So Felicia wants to know, how do you manage all the grading, especially 15 discussions on top of other assignments?
Yeah, it's a lot of work. I'm not going to deny. In an ideal world, I would have graduate students, preferably PhD students who might be interested in teaching in this area, come along with me so I can mentor them and also help with the grading. It's a lot of grading. So this semester, I'm not as blessed, so I'm grading a lot, nights, weekends, or whatever. And I cap the enrollment to, let's see, I have close to 40 students, and that's about all I can do.
So is it a required course for all communication students? That's what Deborah wants to know.
Good question. So in the College of Journalism and Mass Comm, some areas or departments require it for their students, others recommend it. I always have full classes. And so as a college, we're working through that idea of diversity requirement. And so far, this is the course that we have.
And how do you teach the students to approach or set up the interviews? That's what Stephen wants to know.
Yes, good question. So first, I give them plenty of notice. At the very beginning of the semester, I tell them this is coming up. I have detailed instructions. Now, again, I'm operating online. So I have detailed instructions. I have examples, snippets from what other students have done. And then I have prearranged limited Zoom meetings. So I say, if you want to talk about something for an hour, I call them happy hour conversations. I set up the dates according to my schedule, and it's usually an odd time in the evening or late at night, and we just pop in and talk. In addition, I use a text app called Remind, and I can send out short messages, daily, weekly reminders, do this, keep up with this. So I try to keep those channels of communication open, so if they have questions, they can reach me. However, my best strategy is to anticipate those questions and answer it fully so that they can see the examples, see the instructions, and do it themselves. Usually, I just have to encourage them. I mean, they'll say, I'm a little nervous. Everybody else says I'm a little nervous. And then I say, you can do it. And they do it.
So there's a question here, and I'm also interested to hear how you answer this one. How do you handle students? I will probably not, ask directly about or mentioning names, but white supremacy, for example, in the classrooms, or students who dominate conversations, when there are many racialized students in the room who don't get a chance to speak?
That's a really good question. And that's a concern that I certainly had in the face-to-face class sessions. In fact, that is part of the motivation for my going to a small group, or what I call buzz group discussions. So I never had a situation where I would say, who thinks or who wants to comment on XYZ, raise your hand, because you know you're going to find the same students or the most talkative ones dominating the conversation. So by pushing them, say, into the small groups, they not only have to listen to other people in their group, but they get to listen to everybody else in the class. So everybody gets a stake in the game. I also am very conscious about the name of this class. So the class is called Race, Gender, Class, and the Media. If you have an issue about studying race, don't sign up for this class. You know, I've only had one student who said, you know, I just don't see, at the end of the course, he did all the assignments, but he said, I just think we spend too much time talking about problems. My parents taught me to see, you know, we don't see race, we see everybody as one. And I said, okay, that's fine. But this is the course. So.
And you see, seeing everybody as one or being colorblind is definitely not the way to go when you want to bring about social justice or understanding of equity. And I like the questions from Carmen here, and she's asking, what do you think about Candice? And I guess maybe it's Ibram Kendi, if I'm not wrong.
Yes.
Dislike of the term microaggressions. He says there's nothing micro about racial abuse and has supported using the term.
That's true. Well, I talk about what has been established terminology, microaggressions, macroaggressions. And so it's a way of introducing students to the subtlety.
Actually, Dr. Mehta, I should have said he has stopped using the term, not supported.
Yes, that is true. But you do find in a lot of the scholarly literature, we still have that term. And one of the things that I want students to know is the terminology of our fields. Now, within that, we can have a discussion about how there really isn't any difference in terms of the harm that can come from a microaggressive move or a macroaggressive move. It all comes from the same source. It's belittling and it's hurtful. And when the students who have experienced this chime in, their classmates get to see, yeah, this is a real thing, and I cannot be too cavalier or too careless about dismissing someone else's experience or excusing something because it is a so-called micro or a little aggression. I think that's a wonderful conversation to have.
Mm-hmm. And in that line, how do you address the term minority? That's from Maurice.
Yes, I don't use that term intentionally, but we explain to the students that I prefer AHANA, you know, Asian, Hispanic, Native American, African American students, or people of color. I use Anglo. I don't like to use white and black and those kind of extremes. So I really explain to the students, this is why I choose this terminology. I want you to be thoughtful about those words as well.
Before we go to the next question, is this an elective course or is it required or?
Good. It is required for some of the majors in the College of Journalism and Mass Communication. It
Mhm.
is an upper division elective. And
Mhm.
at our campus, students are required to take so many upper division courses.
Mhm.
So in that sense, it can become part of their requirement if it's
Mhm.
not a diversity requirement per se. I
Mhm.
now also have students from different colleges. So it is a instructor permission course. So a student from comm studies or psychology or women and gender studies or whatever can
Mhm.
join the class.
Mhm. Mhm. I want to read a comment here. I agree with it, Deborah Kelly at the University of Minnesota. And she says that our diversity and mass comm class was not required. So we need to make sure we are including equity issues into other courses as well. I agree. I think we have to teach from an equity and social justice lens. There is no way around it. We have to encourage faculty to do that. And this is why your course is so critical and so important. Alexander is asking, did your class have the opportunity to participate in the scholar strike this last September? Did you gain valuable experiences from it that helped you in your own instruction?
I loved the scholar strike. It was an amazing international effort. Now, my course is online, so I already had it available
Mhm.
for the students. What I did during scholar strike days, I just uh, removed myself from any active engagement with a committee. I shouldn't say this out loud, right? But but I did intentionally think about my time to focus on the conversations, to look at what other scholars were doing, and to
Mhm.
tweet out support for what was going on.
Mhm. Mhm. So you did mention about a textbook at the beginning of the broadcast. Can you repeat the title of that textbook? I have seen Mia Moody is saying that they use the term Ahana based on your textbook. I
Thank you,
think,
Mia.
and Pablo is saying he's never heard of the term Ahana, but I think he's trying to learn more about it. So maybe one or two other questions here. And Kelly is asking, what are your thoughts on the term people of the global majority, PGM? There's so many acronyms these days.
I love that term, and it is accurate, is it not? Right? This is why I really hate to use minority majority, because it really isn't a factual description
Mm-hmm.
of who we are and where we are. I
So
have
we
not
are
used
the
that.
majority.
Yes, yeah, we definitely are. So I love that term. It certainly brings in international perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
thank you for suggesting it.
I don't see any other question. Let me see whether there's one more here before we close. Yes, Maurice is asking about equity and equality. How do you address the stories that the students write about using this perspective? Perspective is equity is equality plus fairness.
So there is a a concept that I find um, accessible for the students. We can talk about diversity. That means just sprinkling a lot of difference in a room. We can talk about inclusion.
Mhm.
We can talk about equity. Those are three different things. So you can have diversity, just sprinkling difference in the room.
Mhm.
Um, you can talk about ways in which people's voices are heard or recognized in different ways? Are they included in every step of the enterprise in which you're involved? That's the question, and that's the difference. And that's also the conversation I want students to have. Just because they look up and they see somebody who is physically different from them does not mean that they've achieved diversity in their setting or in their own lives.
Mhm.
Hope
Definitely,
that helps.
fairness we have to have equity and social justice to
Yes.
actually reach that fairness. Uh, so I think that is all we have from our attendees. But one last one from Stephen. Do you get any resistance to students who don't want to tweet?
So I'm glad you asked that. That's a good question. I have noticed lately that students have been more reserved because they are reluctant to put them, and these are my Anglo students, and I'll be honest, I had a student contact me. I used to do Facebook posts and things, and he got a job, and he said, gee, could you remove my thing offline? So then it began to click with me that for some students, they don't want a digital record that they feel might be harmful to them. I respect that.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what I offer them. They have to do Twitter, but they can create an avatar. They can create an identity that's known to me strictly for this class. Now, the content has to be legitimate. It has to reference our discussions and, things that are tied to the class. But after the class is over, they can eliminate the account. I'm good and they're good.
Wow. I want to remind everyone that Dr. Mera Kastafan has listed her book in the chat. The book is Race, Gender, Class, and the Media, third edition from Kendall Hunt Publishing. Go check it out. I want us to join hands. You can clap or you can do whatever you want to do. We can see you, but we do want to thank Dr. Mera Kastafan from the Gaylord College here at the University of Oklahoma in Norman. Thank you so much, Dr. Mera, for your time, for being with us. We appreciate you. We appreciate what work you're doing here at the University of Oklahoma. I'm so glad to know you and for all the support that you give our students, our faculty, and everybody else. So thank you so much. If you can drop a thank you so that Dr. Mera can read it as we sign off. We want to thank everybody. We hope that you keep tuning in to NCORE, start the conversation online. If you have a great idea about a webinar, would like to hear from you. Also make sure that you can actually check out our other webinars. We do have a full range of free webinars posted. We have others that are coming up at a very, very modest fee. Thank you all so much for listening to us on Race, Class, Gender, and the Media, teaching diversity, equity, and inclusion in media and communication studies. Thank you all. Stay warm, keep safe, and take care.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. I appreciate you, Jane. Thank you, everybody.
I appreciate you too, Dr. G. All right. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.